Hello and welcome to my presentation. For my author spotlight, I will be presenting my research on Algernon Blackwood, one of the most prolific ghost writers of the 20th century, who included some of the most well-known supernatural elements in horror that we typically see nowadays, and or sometimes in modern media. I hope you enjoy. Here is a quote I found which I believe embodies one of Blackwood's key writing elements within his stories. Great revelations of nature, of course, never fail to impress in one way or another, and I was no stranger to moods of the kind. Mountains overawe and oceans terrify, while the mystery of great forests exercises a spell peculiarly its own. But all these, at one point or another, somewhere link on intimately with human life and human experience. They stir comprehensible, even if alarming, emotions. They tend on the whole to exalt. Who was Blackwood? Blackwood would be described as the most well-known and prolific ghost story writer of the 20th century. He was a novelist, a short story writer, and a mystic who was well known for his ghost stories and for his influence on H.P. Lovecraft and J.R. Tolkien. Algernon Blackwood was a skillful storyteller that integrated elements of the supernatural, the psychological, and the natural world to create a unique and lasting contribution to the horror and weird fiction genre. He also has an extensive, diverse portfolio, dabbling in children's stories to short collections of short stories, his own autobiography, journalism, and many other journalistic works. During Blackwood's lifetime, he had authored and published his own autobiography, which detailed his adventures and misadventures during his adolescent and young adult years right up until his 30th birthday. He would go on to name his autobiography Episodes Before 30, and there would be no continuation or further progress made on his autobiography during his lifetime. At the beginning of his life, he describes his mother as a widow, and her marriage to his father was her second marriage. She was known as the Duchess of Manchester, and she had married an evangelical speaker and influential writer during the English evangelical movement. His father and mother were very devout Christians, especially during this time of religious revival in England, which is a notable detail that Blackwood would continue to draw upon in his writing and would continue to influence his writing style throughout his writing career. His early education or what is recorded, says that he was sent to Germany to study at a private Brotherhood academy where he did not spend too many years at before his father had placed him in Wellington College at the age of 17, which he also did not finish. After 1 year at Wellington College, he decided to move to Canada to pursue financial sustainability, and hopefully, in his mind, he had hoped to achieve a name and success for himself. In his autobiography, he does not give too much detail on the time period or years on in which he did certain careers and dabbled in different occupations. But since his move to Canada in 1890, he had started a dairy farm which ended up being unsuccessful, which then led him to purchasing a small hotel business in Toronto, which had also failed. He at one point also tried to get rich during the Ontario Gold Rush, which also did not end up working out for him. He then recounts, notably in his autobiography, that he took on a very miserable job as a third-rate reporter for the Evening Star when he moved to New York City. After all of these misadventures and unsuccessful work trying to become financially independent and sustainable, Blackwood decided to move back to England in 1890, thus ending this period of his life that he recounted in his autobiography. Once Blackwood had made it back to England, he started another dairy farm to try and earn a living. He was still writing at this time. He had been writing almost since he was a teenager and a young adult, but he had never really published any of his stories up until one of his friends had published 2 of his works without his consent, and from there he was able to break into the publishing world and was met with immediate approval and success from readers and from audiences, which motivated him to publish an official publication of his own, which was titled The Empty House and Other Ghost Stories, which really leaned into the supernatural elements that he was interested. And in 1934, Blackwood had gained a following and a lot of fame and renown that the BBC gave him his own airing time to be able to read his short stories over the radio, which had also increased his fame and had etched his name into the history of the horror genre.
broke the wind a bit. Everything was snug for the night, the canoe lying turned over beside the tent. We smothered the embers of the fire with sand, and then turned in. It was neither the wind nor the river that woke me, but the slow approach of something that caused the sleeping portion of me to grow smaller and smaller, till at last it vanished altogether, and I found myself sitting bolt upright, listening. I sat there nervously, wide awake, as though I had not slept at all. Then suddenly the explanation leapt into my mind. A bough had fallen with the wind. Still half caught by the other branches, its leaves brushed and tapped upon the tight canvas surface of the tent. But when I got out and stood upright, I saw that the tent was free. There was no hanging bough. There was no rain or spray. Nothing approached. A dreadful discovery leapt out at me. For a change, I thought, had somehow come about in the arrangement of the landscape. It was not that my point of vantage gave me a different view, but that an alteration had apparently been effected in the relation of the tent to the willows. Surely the bushes now crowded much closer, unnecessarily, unpleasantly close. They had moved nearer. I crawled stealthily into my blankets. My companion, to all appearances, still slept soundly, and I was glad that this was so, provided...
Now I will move on to Blackwood's body of works and the influences that he has had throughout his life that led to him publishing the types of works that he did and helped develop his writing style and unique sense of horror. One of Blackwood's main inspirations and influence throughout his writing would be his religious upbringing as a child and his spiritualism that he developed throughout his teenage and adult years as he would continuously research and talk about mysticism and different supernatural beliefs. Blackwood would later on admit that he had rejected all kinds of organized religions as an adult, since even in his writing he would implicitly talk about how he disliked how strict and conservative the religions, organized religions in England were, and how he disobeyed their religious laws and rules as well. Blackwood developed his interest in spiritualism and other religions in his teenage years in Germany. In Blackwood, specifically, he had dabbled in studying theosophy, yoga, and Buddhism, which all intrigued him, and that he would continue to read and study Eastern Asian religions and philosophies into his later years, and even as an adult, he had obtained a membership within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, where he had access to documents and other practices where he would learn about occultism, mysticism, and also the psychic realm. Having researched Blackwood's countless works, one reoccurring and main theme that pops up in a lot of his published works is the beauty, the importance, and impact that the natural world, that Mother Earth has on humanity and our daily lives. Blackwood, as I have established, has had a fascination with the supernatural and especially with nature and the outdoors and wildlife. And throughout his stories we see how he gives life an agency and almost a consciousness to forests, trees, and rivers as they also become active participants in his narratives. Another concept that we see Blackwood delve into a bit as well is the inclusion of the possibility of multiple realities or planes of existence that exist freely and naturally in either the wilderness or in supernatural areas. And another reoccurring theme throughout his stories is the psychological and existential threat and emotions that his characters feel at the horror of their insignificance and how humanity is essentially powerless to the might of the world that we live in.
My heart quickened as I listened. The wind blowing in those sand funnels, I said, determined to find an explanation. Or the bushes rubbing together after the storm, perhaps. Our meal was beyond question a gloomy one, and we ate it almost in silence, avoiding one another's eyes and keeping the fire bright. The curious sound became now almost incessant, and filled the stillness of the night with a faint continuous ringing, rather than a series of distinct notes. We sat smoking in comparative silence, the strain growing every minute greater. There are things about us, I'm sure, that make for disorder, disintegration, destruction, our destruction, the Swede said once while the fire blazed between us. We've strayed out of a safe line somewhere. There are forces close here that could kill a herd of elephants in a second, as easily as you or I could squash a fly. Our only chance is to keep perfectly still. Our insignificance may perhaps save us. I think they feel us, but cannot actually see us. We must keep our minds quiet. It's our minds they feel. We must control our thoughts, or it's all up with us. We must keep them out of our minds at all costs, if possible. Above all, don't think. What you think happens. We'll make one more blaze, I said firmly, and then turn in for the night. At sunrise we'll be off full speed. Now, pull yourself together a bit and remember your own advice about not thinking fear.
Now I will be discussing one of Blackwood's most influential and well-known stories that he has written, which is called The Wood of the Dead. The story begins with a narrator who is known as a visiting traveler to the English countryside, who had stopped at an inn in a small rural town. The narrator tells us that he's been there for a while, and when suddenly he notices an old man had taken a seat at his table, and he believes that he wasn't there before, and he is uncomfortable and a little perturbed by why he decided to sit next to him in a not so busy area of the inn. He glances periodically at the old man when suddenly he catches his eye, and the old man begins to speak to him in a very methodical and almost, in a very pleasant tone and voice that the narrator notices and informs us about. He also tells us that the old man has a very strong and calming aura, almost ethereal, and his presence is invisible but at the same time very alluring, but in a way that is comforting and calming. Something that, a presence that has everyone else yearn for fulfillment and completion in their life. The old man gives the narrator some otherworldly advice and wisdom that completely shocks our traveler narrator. He does not explicitly tell us exactly what the old man says, but it has shocked him. And by the end of their conversation, the old man invites the narrator to the woods. And then the old man vanishes. The narrator does not see him get up and leave. The narrator is so spooked by this that he asks the innkeeper's daughter if he had seen the old man and who he might be. The innkeeper's daughter is very familiar with this occasion happening more than once in the inn, and he tells the narrator that the old man used to be a real person, implying that yes, he was alive, and during his lifetime he had learned of some other worldly supernatural power and knowledge that he had bared until his death, and he could not really share with others, but that he had taken a liking to the woods that the narrator had been invited to, and she said that they are actually called now the Wood of the Dead, that the townsfolk has called it that since the death of the old man. That night, the narrator escapes the inn to take a walk to the Wood of the Dead, where he is greeted by the old man at the tree line at the edge of the wood. And in the Wood of the Dead, he sees and witnesses how the old man takes essentially the soul of the innkeeper's daughter, who was at the edge of the wood, early in the morning. So this scene implies that the Wood of the Dead can also acts as some sort of bridge through time, since the narrator had entered it at night and the innkeeper's daughter had passed away in the morning, or late afternoon actually. The old man is the one that invites the innkeeper's daughter over into the Wood of the Dead, and that is how he takes her soul. From this, the town is shook, and so is the narrator. The narrator feels as though he has seen and learned something he was tricked into believing was ethereal, so would somehow satisfy his curiosity and fill him with some sort of completion, when in reality it only filled him with dread and just more burning questions that he would never get, as he does not visit the Wood of the Dead after his brisk encounter with death. Blackwood's The Wood of the Dead is a story that questions humanity's relationship and connections with nature, with death, with reality, and includes some supernatural elements in order to convey those feelings that someone mortal might feel when faced with these existential concepts and questions. Elements such as the characteristics of the afterlife, its unknown to humans. And Blackwood almost insinuates in his story that it is a very transformative and otherworldly plane that might just go beyond what we are able to comprehend within our very fragile minds. So it leans a little bit into cosmic horror and just existentialism. The inclusion of death and its almost personification in the old man character also hints at the supernatural in certain ways, such as the symbolic nature of hidden and forbidden knowledge that the old man shares with the narrator at first and then later demonstrates to him when he takes the soul of the innkeeper's daughter. Blackwood also mentions throughout the story the passage of time, although it's not entirely explained or focused or detailed within his writing. It plays a critical role when examining what the story is trying to say about the reality that we live in and what we know, the facts that we know about what makes up our world. Blackwood almost is implying that our world and the concepts that we know about nature, time, death, the afterlife are all somehow interwoven and intersect in different instances, in different moments, in different places, and that when they do, it creates this sort of dark beauty that the old man and the narrator were telling us throughout their conversation in the inn, and what the narrator was feeling throughout the story after his encounter with the old man. This intersection of supernatural and otherworldly concept bleeds horror, as humanity does not completely understand these concepts, and through Blackwood's story we are grasping at trying to understand what happened that night, what happened when we experience death, but in the most profound and almost peaceful way. Where do we go? Is this completely what we want? And if this is something that awaits all of us, or is this something that only a few lucky people get to experience at the end of their lives? At the end of the story, right before the narrator wakes up from the trance that he was in, Blackwood writes, "I seemed to catch the answer in that deep, thrilling whisper I already knew. And you shall sleep, my child. Sleep for a long, long time until it is time for you to begin the journey again." In that brief second of time, I had recognized the face and voice of that innkeeper's daughter, but the next minute a dreadful wail broke from the lips of the young man, and the sky grew suddenly as dark as night. The wind rose and began to toss the branches about us, and the whole scene was swallowed up in a wave of utter blackness. And for my final slide, here are some questions I found compelling enough to include, and which I hoped were interesting enough for others or for the audience to contemplate and maybe answer in the comments and the feedback. So, one of my questions is, what do you think the wood of the dead symbolizes? Is it a literal place, a state of mind, or something else? It could mean in a literal or maybe in a figurative way. That could be a good start to contemplating its meaning. Next question says, the novel blurs the lines between the natural and supernatural realms. What does this blurring suggest about how death connects both realms? I personally believe that there is some sort of portal or link between each realm, and either realm can't exist without the other, but they contain a lot of power and influence to not be able to create change within their own realities. So maybe that's why the narrator was seeing it throughout the story. Maybe it was leaking into one another. Who knows? And finally, thank you so much for sticking to the end of my presentation. I hope to hear all of your feedback and the comments, and I can't wait to respond to everyone's suggestions and opinions. Thank you.